The sweetest moment was the first warning. I'll tell you the phrase I wish I had said in the end. Dear daughter, it's night, and the only light comes from my computer screen. The silence hangs heavily in the air, and every keystroke echoes as I write this for you so you won't repeat the mistakes I made. Back then, I was full of dreams. I wanted to love and be loved. But beneath the surface, there was a deep exhaustion, tired of fighting, of feeling invisible. When someone looked at me with intensity, I thought it was love, and I ignored the signs. The first time I felt special was when he said, "You are everything I've always wanted." My heart raced. It was sweet, it was light, but it was also a trap. The belief that I needed to be perfect to deserve love. And that's when he started asking me questions about every step I took. Where are you? Who are you with? It seemed caring, but it was disguised control. I didn't realize it. I swallowed my words and thought everything was okay. By the time I noticed, I was already caught in a web of rules that I had helped weave. Guilt began to accumulate. Silence. The weight of not living up to his expectations suffocated me, and the conversations that should have flowed turned into torturous interrogations. We barely talked anymore. Then I thought, what did I do wrong? What do I need to change for him to see me again? It was about me, and I didn't realize it. A line had been crossed. The consequence of this disguised love hit like a tsunami. Confusion and sadness. My feelings became a burden. What I believed was love turned into punishment. Here's the bare truth. What sounded like protection was actually a prison, and I didn't know. So listen closely, daughter. If love feels like a game where you always lose, pause. If promises turn into demands, pause. And if you need a reminder to protect yourself, here it is. I deserve love that is unconditional. In the next entry, I will share more messages about what I confused with love and what it really means to be free. The truth is that in the darkest moments, loneliness became a familiar companion. As the walls of my world closed in, I hid in small fragments of happiness, creating a mosaic of illusions and appearances. I smiled at others, but inside, there was an empty echo, and it was then, one ordinary night, while looking out the window, I noticed the full moon reflected on the sidewalk. It was a cruel beauty, for despite its brightness, the chill of the night penetrated deeply. I thought about how light can be misleading. The moonlight did not warm. It was just a play of shadows and glimmers. So was my relationship, filled with sparkling promises, yet devoid of warmth. "You look beautiful," he said in a soft tone, but as soon as the words left his lips, a storm began to brew within me. I wanted to believe it, but instead, I questioned, but am I really? Each compliment was laden with doubts and insecurities. Behind that mask of affection, there was an added pressure. The moonlight reflected a love that was far from pure. And then, the comparisons began. He talked about his ex-girlfriends as if they were unattainable standards of perfection. She did this better, or she never complained. I absorbed it all like a sponge, suffocated by the weight of expectation. Love turned into a self-improvement project instead of a safe haven, and I didn't realize how much I was losing myself. Sometimes, when I was with friends, I would look at them and feel a twinge of jealousy. They laughed, shared lighthearted stories, while I found myself increasingly trapped in my own denial. "How are you?" they would ask, and I always responded, "I'm fine." But inside me, the storm was intensifying. I wanted to scream, but my voice was stuck. It was at one of those parties, surrounded by laughter and music, that everything unfurled like a movie reel. He turned to me and said, with a look that overflowed with possessiveness, "Why are you so distant? Are you seeing someone?" His words were like a blade cutting through the air. A chilling wave washed over me. The light conversation transformed into a silent interrogation. No one noticed, but the world around me was crumbling, and I didn't realize that the distance he perceived was, in fact, a defense mechanism. I was protecting myself from the pain that grew day by day. The truth is that his possessiveness had turned into a subtle poison, tainting even the simplest moments. The laughter of friends became distant echoes as I struggled to maintain control of the situation. Time passed, and the day came when the rope snapped. With tears in my eyes, I finally gathered the courage to speak. "This isn't love." The phrase hung in the air, like a bomb ready to explode. In that moment, he looked at me as if he were seeing straight through me. His expression mixed confusion and anger. "You don't know what you're saying," he replied. And it was at that instant I realized I had lost my voice. With each attempt to reclaim my space, I felt myself sinking deeper. Guilt was like a chain tethered to my ankle. Every move I tried to make felt like an act of rebellion. I no longer knew who I was. The line between love and control blurred. There were no flames left, just cold ashes under the rubble of a shattered dream. And so, my dear, I reached my turning point. I looked at those wounds and realized they were part of my story but didn't define who I am. If you let them turn you into rules, know that this isn't love. Freedom begins with recognition. Recognition of yourself, of what you deserve. People may try to shape your worth, but remember, your shine doesn't depend on anyone. That's the raw truth. From this point forward, I won't allow the shadow of the past to dim my light, and you shouldn't either. In the next entry, I'll tell you about the small victories that helped me find my voice again. Freedom began to take shape within me, like a plant pushing through the cracks in the concrete. I didn't yet know what it would be like to cultivate this new life, but I felt a seed sprouting in the darkness. And it was at that moment that a new character entered the scene. A friend. The kind of friend who wasn't afraid to expose uncomfortable truths. She was direct, straightforward. During the afternoons we spent together, she wouldn't settle for surface-level answers. "How do you feel?" was just the beginning. The questions that followed were like thorns, poking at the skin of my complacency. But I needed that. I needed someone to look me in the eye and ask what I really wanted, what I truly felt. One time while we were having coffee, I said, "I don't know if I'm worthy of love." The phrase slipped out almost inadvertently, like a lost sigh. She paused, locked eyes with me, and replied, "People don't define your worth. You need to redefine this on your own." It was hard to hear, but there was something about the way she said it that made me want to believe. The warmth of the coffee in my hands was a temporary relief, but her words carried a heavier weight. And then, on a morning when the sky was so blue it looked like a blank canvas, I decided to take the first concrete step. With a notepad and an old pen, I sat down in the park. Around me, children were laughing, couples were holding hands, and I felt the need to document everything I had suffocated for so long. I started to write about what I wanted, what I deserved, and for each desire, I had to face the pain of the memories I was trying to bury. I recalled the words that had trapped me. "You are everything I have ever wanted." It was time to rewrite that narrative. What did I want now? I wanted a love that embraced, not one that suffocated. I wanted space to grow, not rules that shaped me. As the days went by, the pages filled up. I deserve laughter without pressure. I deserve to be seen, not just as a reflection of others' expectations. Each sentence became a silent manifesto against the chains that imprisoned me. In the midst of writing, I realized that this practice was not just about complaining or talking about pain. It was about building new foundations. So, one day, as I reread everything, I saw that they weren't just words. They were promises to myself. I began to understand that freedom would not be a single event, but a continuous process. I continued to see my friend, and she became a beacon. Not because she had all the answers, but because she encouraged the search for my own answers. She was the one who reminded me that acknowledging and confronting pain does not weaken me. It is an act of courage. With her, the conversations began to flow differently. When I talked about my fears, there was no judgment, just understanding. Each sharing reinforced the idea that I wasn't alone. But then, the shadow of the old relationship still lingered in my heart. Sometimes, quiet nights brought memories, like a distant echo calling me back, a nightmare that I couldn't escape. One day, running into him became inevitable. He was there, at a casual event, surrounded by friends. The world seemed to freeze, and I found myself reliving that familiar chill I knew so well. I took a deep breath. I was overwhelmed by a wave of insecurity, but I also felt something new, a spark of power. And when our eyes met, the words that would have made me melt before were now loaded with new meaning. I was no longer the same. What he saw was no longer vulnerability. It was strength. "Hi," I said, and to my surprise, my voice didn't tremble. He smiled, mentioned something about the old times, but there was a distance between us, an invisible barrier I had never noticed before. I wasn't there to be measured or compared. I was simply living, and that was liberating. In that moment, I realized that true victory wasn't in the words I would say, but in the ones I no longer needed to hear. I decided I wouldn't return to the cycle of validation, where my worth depended on his approval. My voice, once silenced, was finding a new tone, an unshakable resilience. Freedom wasn't an end, but merely a beginning. And here I am, writing all of this, realizing that every line is a step out of the prison those years had been. It remains a journey, and in the next entry, I'll share the small victories that help me find my voice again. What may seem simple to some is, at times, a mountain to climb, and I am rising. And as the days went by, I realized that the journey wouldn't just be about leaving the past behind. It was also about how to build a future where I could truly reside. Small victories began to emerge like flowers breaking through the cracks in the concrete. One morning, upon waking up, I had a simple idea: to write a letter to myself. Not just any letter, but a declaration of intentions. I sat down at the kitchen table, the soft morning light filtering through the curtains. The pen glided across the paper. "What do you wish for yourself?" I asked at the start. I hesitated, as I had never been so direct with myself, but there was something cathartic about the writing. I deserve love that respects my freedom. I am enough as I am. Each word turned into a brick that built the foundation of a new me. However, there were still echoes of the past that followed me silently. Memories of him emerged in the shadows, like unwelcome visitors. In moments of solitude, I found myself reliving old conversations, trying to understand how I had come so far without realizing the subtle manipulation that had entrapped me. When this happened, I felt a weight in my chest. It was as if guilt wanted to resurface, suggesting that I was responsible for allowing it all to happen. One night, as I tried to fall asleep, a troubling thought arose. I had stopped being who I was. The fear of returning to that version of myself who believed she didn't deserve genuine love began to haunt me. And so, during a conversation with my friend, I mentioned this internal battle. She listened patiently, her eyes understanding, and then shared a story of her own. A moment when she felt lost until she realized that each step forward was a conscious choice. You don't need to have all the answers right now. It's about where you place your attention. You're here, and that's already a big step, she said. The simplicity of the statement resonated with me. That notion that life didn't have to be a frantic race, but rather a careful stroll where each breath mattered. Jumping out of my chair, I picked up the pen again. When I wrote that it was okay to feel insecure, the words drained a bit of the tension I was carrying. It was as if the paper was absorbing my doubts. I decided that instead of fighting against those feelings, I would embrace them. After all, courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it. So, with this new understanding, I began to explore new interests. One day, I decided to join a dance class. I had never danced before, and I felt a flutter of nerves as I walked through the studio door. But when I stepped inside, I was welcomed by laughter and a vibrant energy. The music enveloped me, and for a few hours, I was able to let loose. Every movement was a declaration of freedom. I danced as if no one was watching, and for the first time in years, I felt light. As dancing became a part of my routine, I started to notice subtle changes. Looking in the mirror, I saw not just the reflection of who I was, but of who I could become. There was strength in my posture, a spark in my eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. The classes became a safe space, a place where I could express everything I felt without fear of judgment. Each step was an affirmation that I was there for myself. One day, after a particularly intense class, I met a woman who was as immersed in dance as I was. She approached me and shared that she, too, had just left a toxic relationship. We talked about our experiences, and in that moment of vulnerability, I realized I wasn't the only one facing internal storms. The connection I formed was a reminder that pain can be shared and transformed into collective strength. Over the weeks, dancing became a symbol of my liberation. Each rehearsal was intertwined with new friendships, laughter, and a renewed sense of community. With each movement, I left behind a little more of my past. In this new space, I learned to appreciate every small victory, from keeping up with the steps to daring to improvise. It was a continuous effort, but one that was worth it. As my confidence grew, I realized there was a sense of responsibility in sharing all of this. Over time, I began to talk about my experience in small groups, sharing my story. Each story was like pulling a thread, weaving a tapestry of resilience. By listening to other women share their struggles, I realized there was power in coming together. Ultimately, I made a commitment to myself, to never again allow anyone to dictate my worth. True love comes without conditions, and respect must be mutual. More importantly, I discovered that self-love is the cornerstone of any healthy relationship. The freedom to acknowledge my scars and still dance, smile, and live life to the fullest was the greatest lesson. In the next entry, I'll tell you about the times doubt came back to visit me and how I learned to embrace it, turning it into a drive to continue growing. Recognizing this part of myself was not about weakness, but about accepting the complexity of being human. Each day represents a new opportunity, and I am embracing every moment,